Woodrow Mercer was to really try and share some insight and some knowledge from people who are involved in the talent industry, and not necessarily just agency recruiters like myself, but people who work on the customer side. So people who are dealing with CVs, interviews, and the process of someone trying to secure a job. As I'm sure you'll all agree, the market's changed a lot in the last 6 months with what's happened with COVID, and undoubtedly it's left us all seeing many more people applying for jobs than there were before. So if we can share some insights today into how some of these people can kind of maximize their chances of securing a job, then I'm sure that there'll be some people who are very appreciative out there. So there's people watching along, and I'm also going to write up some notes following the call and try and share those with people. From the last session, the first session was about CV tips. We actually shared that with over 1,000 people and got just over 100 people come back to us with messages of thanks. So again, your contributions are really valid, and I'm sure they'll be helpful to lots of people. So today's about interviews. I put in the message that went out with this session that a report recently showed that less than 5% of interviews that are currently conducted within the tech industry are taking place face-to-face because of the obvious restrictions. So the very nature of how interviews are now conducted has changed massively. There's a question back out to you four, and we'll cover in the next hour. What can people do to their traditional interview, perhaps technique and preparation, to give themselves the best chance? So I'll go around each of you in turn to start off with the first question, and then we'll open up into more of a free-flowing discussion, if that's okay. So the first question, or the first section really, is about preparation. And it's about setting the right kind of expectations, potentially. So what do you think that agencies and maybe employers can do to help prepare candidates before they come onto that Zoom call or the Teams call? And if I just start with perhaps Danielle. You're on mute at the moment.
There we are. So firstly, make sure that when you join an interview, you're not on mute. First things first, without sort of sounding completely obvious, but making sure that you've downloaded the tech. So if it's MS Teams, if it's Skype, make sure you've got it downloaded well in time. Join, I would say, 5 minutes before, not too much more before that. Again, make sure you're dressed in business dress. So I've conducted a number of interviews virtually where it really stands out if someone, if a man's there in a shirt and tie. Same with female, just dress as if you would in any face-to-face interview. I've had some real disastrous interviews where the camera's fallen down and you can see that people are in kind of their pajamas in the bottom half. The other thing, make sure, again, it's difficult, everyone's working from home, but that your dog's not running in the background, that your children are not running in the background, be in a quiet room. So they're key things, I would say, in terms of preparing for virtual interviews.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So Margaret, to you then. So what can we do from our side to help prepare candidates, do you think?
Well, as an agency, the more information you give to the candidate, the better. So, I know it varies greatly, the level of detail that you will have about the position. But I think the more you can mention to the candidate about the company, about the team, about the office, about the hiring manager. If you've had other candidates who are perhaps unsuccessful with this company, tell them why. If you've had candidates who are successful before, tell them what the hiring manager is looking for. So just the more information, the better. But just in general, to make yourself stand out in this market, I think it's just so important that as a candidate, you really take that preparation into control, because you can't obviously predict every possible question, but there are so many people who just kind of don't really do enough research. So for example, even researching the company, I mean, almost all candidates of course do it to an extent, but the interview isn't a test to see whether you can read the company's website. So as a candidate, you really want to identify opportunities and demonstrate how you can add value to the company if they hire you. So take the information that you gain through your research and prepare some insightful questions and observations that can serve as discussion points during the interview. So there's a lot on this topic. I've actually recorded a quick YouTube video on this topic, but just a few quick tips. So firstly, don't just check the company website for information. I mean, of course, you should look at the company website, the history, the mission statement, look at the product and services to get a handle on how they present themselves to the marketplace. I also look at the management's career histories, what professional and educational credentials are valued by the firm. I also always Google the company to see what kind of articles are written by third parties as well. Always watch some videos on YouTube. I would also recommend, especially for more senior positions, to look at some of the interviews of top execs from within the organization. I've actually recently interviewed for a position, and I've watched some videos of the CEO talking about the product, and I had some really good, insightful information, and the recruiter was very impressed because that wasn't something that was on the website. And other stuff, like follow them on social media, see what they are talking about and posting about, what are the themes, are there any special, events or promotions, and, how could you potentially contribute to their success. Review the financial information, review information on Glassdoor of what others are saying about the company, research the competitors, research the interviewer, research them on LinkedIn and Google to look for possible conversation points and common interests. So there's just there's a lot of research that you can do as a candidate to make yourself stand out, even if you haven't got enough information from the agency. And one final thing, you really need to be really familiar with every single bullet point on your CV. And for each bullet point on your CV, just write down a few examples outlining how you've performed or achieved that particular bullet, and then know the numbers associated with each bullet point on your CV as well. And maybe even take it one step further and know how they came about. So let's say you've increased sales by 23%. So know what the starting and ending revenue numbers were, which markets contributed to the increase, and what changes you made to get the increase. And really, as the main prep, you need to prepare stories about challenges, failures, achievements, and difficult situations that are also not on your resume, because these types of questions always come up. So I think it's, the more you can be briefed by an agency, the better. But let's be honest, the agency doesn't always have all of the information that the candidate will need. So it's really up to you to make yourself stand out.
Perfect. Thank you. I've written lots of that down. There's some great points in there. Richard?
Oh, that wasn't planned. I was just going through that hard work. It was really good. Thanks, Margaret. It's a real challenge because a lot of people who I see, not remotely, of course, now, but their preparation, they're really skilled, but their market switch are really congested. So therefore, I think I can get the job because they've not really tried at that stage. But actually, those who get the offers this year are those who actually really want the company. To the extent where one of the guys who was hired in September this year, he was interviewed by myself initially, and then by our consulting director for the UK, and also by the manager of consulting for the Netherlands as well. And he knew inside leg measurements, was that well researched. So, pardon? He knew more about them than I did myself. But it's much more about, I look upon it like, you think you're going on a date with someone, and therefore you want to know much about them before you go on that date. And actually you need to research your employer like that's that person you're going on a date with. So you have a conversation before you go there. So that's my side point.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Raf?
Hey, listen, how can I add anything to those 4 wonderful accounts already? You've set me up for a fall. I don't know what to say now. No, seriously, I guess when I first started out in recruitment, it was back on the agency side. And I think, just to add to what everyone else has said, there was one kind of analogy that was given to me that kind of still rings true today. And that's the interview process. So if someone's taking you to interview, then more often than not, in their eyes, they think you can do the job because they wouldn't be wasting their time otherwise. So anything you can do to give you extra points will give you points you can lose. I know it sounds like a bit of a weird way of thinking about it, but let's say you're 10 out of 10 based on your CV. So the interview is all about how many marks can you not knock off yourself. So if you've already given yourself a few extra marks by preparing, you already have the extra % in the bank and in the locker, then you've got some points you can afford to lose elsewhere, where maybe if you don't stack up on some areas of the job where they thought you could if they delved deeper. So just picking up on what everyone else has said, do your research and preparation, understand the role that you're going for, understand the selection process, understand what's going to turn on that particular, not in that way, what's going to make them happy about you, and what's going to give you that extra kind of head start into the role.
Excellent. Okay, some really good points. So I think as a general theme, a lot of that has come back to research. So doing various different sort of aspects of research into who's going to interview you. So the actual interviewer, the organisation, maybe some of the exec team, look at their background and some of the kind of visions and strategies they might be sharing on social media. We've spoken briefly there about what to sort of bring out from your own CV and your own credentials. I think for me that was the only point that maybe we could expand on slightly more about how candidates can, look at their own skill set and their own experience and try and really draw on those points. Before we move on to the next question, do you think there's anything else or anything that candidates should be doing specifically with their own CV and their own experience before an interview? Do you think, right, this is what I'm going to go in and talk about?
This one's particularly poignant for me because our interviewers and the people who do the first review of the CV isn't my team, so I'm pretty much standalone. So I rely very much on our hiring managers, who are our line managers. And in many cases, because we're a company of kind of about 300 people, we're not huge, and our heads of department tend to be the ones that do that first sift, and they're very busy already. So if they don't think that someone's CV is a match, or they don't think that someone's put sufficient effort into it, then it just won't progress forward. And that's even true in some hard to fill areas like software engineering, where traditionally people say, okay, well, it doesn't matter if their CV is not that great, it's probably not one of their skill sets, let's still bring them through. But what we found is the ones that do have a strong CV and have made that effort are successful through the process because that effort seems to be replicated. So my advice would be make sure that CV is what people think it should be. And on our career site, for example, we've gone as far as to say, this is what we think a good CV looks like for tech, for engineers. This is what we think maybe doesn't look so great. We didn't use that wording, but it's along those lines. So like you guys mentioned, the other delegates mentioned earlier, it's not a process on how well you can interview, but how well you can get across your experience. So if we can give someone as much fuel or give them the ability to be able to present themselves in the best possible way they can, then we're seeing what it should be the finished article or what we want to see coming into the role.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So if we move on to the if you like, the kind of the meaty bit of the question, the actual interview itself. So what people should be doing during the interview to make themselves stand out. I think Danielle touched on some tips around kind of etiquette and do's and don'ts with regards to how we should perhaps appear and prepare ourselves to be on that call. Is there anything anyone would like to add to that at all?
I mean, I would just say for any interview, really prepare examples of how you have performed or would perform each aspect listed on the job description. So I think most people are aware of the STAR format, the situation, task, action, result. Again, not everyone uses it well, but you really need to be able to provide loads of tactical examples of how you've successfully performed the duties and requirements listed. And I would actually suggest writing down these examples. I'm not saying writing down the whole answer, but just making some notes. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to remember, especially if it's a pretty senior role. You have to prepare for 10, 15 different competencies. So it's just a good idea to write it down. But very important thing to remember is that talk more in terms of results and impact of your work, because a lot of people talk about what they've done and their ideas, like they talk about responsibilities, but they don't talk enough about the results, what was the impact of the work and what was the quantifiable impact of the work. So that's just something to remember. Don't just remove any kind of duties included or responsibilities from your CV, and focus on the action verbs: led, managed, initiated, and also what the specific results were.
Action verbs, I like that. I think particularly in tech, because we're always so bogged down in words and phrases and skills. You're probably right. Sometimes people can kind of get away from how those skills are actually used. So, I'm skilled in JavaScript development, but sometimes that can be the start and the finish of a sentence. Whereas I suppose it's going to be a lot more useful if people can explain what they did with it and what the result was.
Yeah.
Definitely. What value have you added? You could have 12 builders as a crude example. They could all build a wall, but which one can build the prettiest wall, or the wall that's going to get you the best money for your house, as an example? You need to be able to show what value you can add and why you're, I guess, better than other applicants in the process, because ultimately that's what this is. It's a competition, to put it in a crude form, and you want to show that you're better than everyone else and you want to put your best self forward. So you need to show, what have I done that can then be transferred to here? So like Margaret said, what tangible results have I generated in other roles, which then gives you the confidence of someone who's going to hire me, I can do the same or better here.
That's quite interesting what you just said, because personally as well, I think we all have to think what our CV looks like, not to ourselves, but so someone doesn't get what we do. So therefore, I get it checked by a friend of mine who is a recruiter for a big company, but also someone who's very well educated and writes a lot. So one checks the context, what you've done. One checks how well written it is. It gets me jobs finally, but without it, I'd be stymied on it. They do rock.
Okay, great. What about etiquette? So I think we might have spoken about this briefly on the first CA talks, but so less than 5% of interviews are currently taking place in person. If you cast that back to maybe 12 months ago, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but it would be so different. So how does it differ being in a Zoom call or Teams, whatever, to being in person? And what do you think candidates should be thinking about to tweak their approach to an interview? Because there's no handshake anymore. There's no sort of, do you want a coffee as an icebreaker? It's literally straight into a call. So what do you think people should be thinking about before they press enter room?
I mean, okay, no one's saying. So I think, the preparation would remain the same, because in terms of how you prepare for the interview, that's going to be exactly the same in terms of your answers. But, you can still make a good impression. So even as someone mentioned, join a few minutes before, just to make sure that, everything works prior to the interviewer joining the call. I would say have a camera at an eye level as well, because otherwise it just kind of might look like you have a double chin if you just look at your screen down. So it's good to have, I have a couple of books right now under my laptop.
No,
it's good just to have it at the right level. So, have it at the right level. Make sure that you don't have a distracting background. Check the lighting as well. I'm an interview coach as well, and I do a lot of coaching sessions with people. And sometimes I'm like, you just look like if you're in a dingy basement. Like, you can't do an interview that way, because the lighting is like the face is completely covered, the shade is coming from one side. So it seems like really basic things, but people actually don't always remember. So ideally you want to be facing the daylight. I know it's not always possible, but just make sure that you have good light, that not distracting background. No one wants to see your laundry behind you. So, and yeah, having the camera at an eye level. And I think the benefit of a Zoom interview or any kind of video interview is that you can maybe have like a couple of post-it notes on your laptop. Just don't have like 10, because it's going to be quite obvious that you are reading, but it does a couple of things that you just search. Am I going to remember that? You might have a couple of post-it notes on your screen, and the interviewer probably wouldn't notice. So that's important. And again, look at the camera most of the time. I know it's hard because you want to look at the screen as well, you want to see the reactions, but do a little bit of both. And there are a lot of people who don't keep any eye contact, and that definitely helps with building rapport, which obviously harder to do when you don't see them face to face.
Yeah, that's an interesting one about the camera, because even now, you tend to get attracted towards watching the screen rather than watching the camera. And clearly,
I know it's easier. I mean, I think we all have to remember about it all the time, but especially in an interview situation. I'm not saying don't look at the screen all the time. Of course, you're going to look at the screen, but just make sure you're not looking at the screen the whole time. Like right now, I'm looking at the screen. Right now, I'm looking at the camera. So, so I think that the difference is there for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else got anything to add to sort of tips and etiquette around the virtual interview?
Just to add on to that last part where you mentioned around rapport building, it's so difficult. So with a face-to-face interview, I'd always encourage, make sure you make eye contact with both, however many people there are in the interview, which is obviously impossible to do virtually. So again, I've been involved in a lot of interviews virtually, and the ones that really stick in my mind are when the candidate tries to bring people into the interview. So trying to build that rapport when they're responding to questions, actually mentioning both people's names who are actually involved in the interview. Really small things like that go such a long way, and they stick in your mind.
Yeah, I'd agree. Also, don't swear. Even if they swear, don't swear.
Even if they swear, don't swear. Okay. Yeah.
Unless they're swearing at you, and then you're well within your rights to swear back and just come off the call. I wouldn't advise that, though.
Swearing in interviews. Wow, I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, sometimes if they're trying to be cool, maybe.
Are you allowed to swear if it's face to face then, just not virtually?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe that's another podcast altogether.
Have your phone on Do Not Disturb.
And we've spoken about, so we touched on how to tailor our answers as well. So Margaret mentioned the STAR technique, and about using situations and tangible example of things to draw out to get away from just talking about the skills that you've got, to actually look at where you've delivered, what you've been able to achieve, what's been left behind after you've left somewhere. We hire for a lot of contract positions here, and I think one of the things potentially sometimes people miss out from their CVs, and maybe even from their interviews, is what they left behind, what their legacy was after they finished that engagement. Contractors sometimes can get a bit of a bad rep, I suppose, because everyone deems them to be very expensive. But I think if they can continually show value, then it will probably help them get a better kind of perception in the industry as well. So just talking about legacy and track record is probably quite important. Okay, so we've done the kind of meat of this section. We're talking about the interviews. Is there anything else that you think we need to add on to this, or shall I move on to the follow-up?
Just one thing on interviews. The STAR technique was mentioned, and really at the beginning, the company's mission statement, but company's values and behaviour and culture now is becoming just one of the most important things. A lot of organisations will base their interviews on their values and beliefs. So if candidates prepare answers to those values that the company they're interviewing for, that should help. At least you can have a few prepared. They're likely to ask you them.
Great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think values are very, very important. You definitely want to prepare, especially if the company really has their values listed on the website. That means that they, hopefully they live by them. So you definitely want to have some examples. I would also say just one last thing, that given the collaborative nature of the workplace, few things are done without cross-functional effort. So when a functional lead interviews you, impress upon them how you have been successful working with their area to achieve an objective. So say you're a recruiter interviewing for in-house recruitment role, you would want to explain how you have worked closely with, internal mobility team or HR operations team, etc. Or for example, you're talking to finance person and you're remarketing, discuss how finance played a key role in the development of the project strategies. Finance may have driven the revenue targets, the budget and ROI. So, just it's important that you discuss how you work together with finance in this case, not simply ask them for numbers. So, just whichever area you work with the closest, make sure that you also relate your answers to that specific business unit.
Excellent. Okay. The third section that I've put in here as a note to talk about is the follow up. So I think Richard spoke about the fact that sometimes you can have a lot of people interviewing for the same job. Hiring managers might be faced with a list of 10, 15 people who are actually being interviewed. So what do we think, if anything, candidates can do after that call is finished to maximise their chances of getting a successful answer from the interview?
I think do what the Americans do. Always say, thank you for meeting me. It was great seeing you today. It feels very un-English, but we learn from them sometimes.
So I'm going to be controversial here. I don't think that the follow-up makes a huge difference. So the interview process should qualify the candidate in or out. So regardless of how they follow up, shouldn't necessarily make a difference to the outcome. I would always recommend at the end of the interview, as you say, to thank you for the time. And also, if you are interested in the role, confirm that at the end of the interview. It's polite to follow up, but I don't think it has a difference on the outcome. You may disagree, but that's my view.
If the interview went really badly, I agree. It makes no difference whatsoever. But I've seen hiring managers who actually like the fact that the candidate sent a personalized thank you note, not just thanks for your time, but they actually sent a personalized thank you note, and they refer to something discussed during the interview. So, I mean, I agree. The whole interview goes really badly. It definitely won't help. However nice the thank you note is. But I've actually personally seen hiring managers. They were impressed by someone sending a personalized note. Maybe they discussed something during the interview and the candidate maybe provided more research on that topic, or they just refer to something specific. So I still think it makes it can help. But yeah, of course, the interview is the main thing. No doubt here.
It potentially could help if they're not necessarily the best qualified candidate for that specific role. They'll stick in the hiring manager's mind for next time.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Danielle's right. So I think for like 999 times, maybe it won't work. But then I'll give you a personal example. It was a creative role. And after the interview, the person didn't get it, but then they wrote me a limerick about how much they enjoyed the process. And it was fun and it was different. I didn't get them that role, but then they were front of mind for when we were looking at a similar role. So then we contacted them about that role and they never ended up getting it. And granted, it doesn't happen very often, but for that one person, it's a big thing. So I think it's judging what reaction's right for which situation. And for the most part, it's not. But maybe if it's a creative role or something where you can potentially have an impact, then it is. But if there's very strict processes, then there's not a lot you can do. And there is a fine line between being proactive and being really annoying as well. So don't be really annoying.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Next, so are we saying then that? Okay, so let's say, for example, a candidate's been interviewed and the hiring manager clearly likes the candidate and they're going to make an offer. Do you not think it would be helpful for the candidate to explain at the end that they really like the company, they even send an email to that effect, so that when you're doing your work with the hiring manager, you know that if you send that offer out, that candidate's got a much better chance of accepting the job?
No, I agree with that. I think annoying is like, don't follow up 10 times per day. Don't, like, if they tell you you're not gonna hear for 2 weeks, don't email them 2 days later asking any updates. I think that's maybe what someone has meant, because I would find that annoying. But what you've said is perfect. I think that I can definitely help.
I think it's helpful, but I just don't think it changes the outcome of the interview. It would make my job easier if I know the candidate will accept. And I just think it's credible at the end of the interview to confirm that you are interested. But I just don't think that would, if there was 2 candidates in the mix or 3, that it would push the hiring manager to hire that person over the others.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess that's when you can show your value is when you're talking about agency recruiters, Matt. So for my own personal experience, when I was going for the role that I'm in now, I was really enthusiastic, and that enthusiasm can maybe border on looking desperate. You don't want to look desperate, but when there's an agent in between, that's when you prove your worth. So you can get all your enthusiasm across the agent. They can then maybe temper it and put it into a way that's because there's less, it's difficult. They're not as emotionally invested in the situation, I guess. So it's easier for them to put it in a more palatable way.
Yeah. Obviously, the additional dimension of having an agency recruiter can, we act as a conduit at the end of the day, and you're right. We can temper some of their thoughts kind of both ways, and also, let's not pretend we can also kind of temper the thoughts of the customer as well, because sometimes their feedback can be blunt at times, or sometimes it could be potentially on the other end of the spectrum, and that might put a candidate off. So I suppose we're the intermediary, and we can just kind of change that message a little bit if we think it's going to help. Is there anything else you think that candidates can do as a sort of follow up out of courtesy to the companies who've met with them? I mean, as an example, do you think it's worth candidates connecting with people on LinkedIn, following interviews and talking to them that way?
It depends on the role. For sales role, yes, but for software engineering role, probably not.
Yeah.
Why for a sales role?
I'll give you an example. We had a guy who now works for us who, after the interview, we had a lot of candidates at high level for his sales position, and he worked out where the guy lived, and he knew he liked to drink. So he walked around every pub in that guy's area and messed for a drink the next day, like 7 p.m. So then, and suddenly it's like, he's a salesperson, they don't have to engage each other. So, but they got some well, they still do. So he's high performance.
A bit stalkery.
Definitely, that's what we're saying.
So.
I think.
Sorry,
sorry.
No, after you, Daniel. After you, I've said enough.
Just quickly, sometimes in an interview there'll be some sort of common denominator, and then I think it's worth following up,
Exactly.
because sorry, Raf.
No, I was just going to say exactly the same thing. And it's understanding, it's like with anything, it's like with any human interaction, and an interview is no different. It's about judging the situation and judging what's right. You're not going to make that right judgment all the times, but if the sentiment behind what you're doing is right, then it tends to be the right response, because humans interview, right, for the most part. So if you feel that it's an appropriate representation of yourself, or you think it's the right action, then generally it will be right. And if it's not, and you make that mistake, then maybe it's part of the selection process. So you're not going to be taken forward based on that anyway, because you probably wouldn't fit for the company or the situation anyway.
Okay. Anything else to add to that one? No. Okay. I've got a couple of questions that have been asked from the YouTube link. So forgive me if my eyes are flittering slightly on the screen. So in fact, it's one that we've actually covered, but we'll see if there's anything else we can add. So Tony's asked, I'm not that good at interviews. My track record isn't brilliant. Is it okay to finish off your interview with a statement summarising again your interest in the role? I think we've kind of touched on that, so we all kind of agree that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Like
good.
Specific to the role, not a generic thing you just use all the time.
Yeah. Make sure it's relevant.
Okay. And another question we've had. So if you already know that you've got strong references from people in the industry, do you think it's worth utilising those early in the process, i.e. sending those across along with the CV, or like before the interview, to give the company a bit more of a picture before they go into that Zoom call?
As obviously I'm not agency recruitment, so I'm internal recruitment, and I wouldn't take them into consideration. So it could be written by anyone. So, and as you can imagine, there's always a high volume of stuff coming through, CVs, applications. So personally, they wouldn't make a difference to our hiring process. Other companies may be different.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the written references, because that's true. I wouldn't look at any written references before the interview. I think they're irrelevant at that stage. However, let's say you know someone within a company that let's say your boss works, let's say someone you have worked with very closely works for the company you are interested in. If they can vouch for you, if they can mention to the hiring manager, listen, I've worked with this guy or I've worked with this woman, they are amazing. I think that can 100% help. If you can get any kind of internal recommendation, just any kind of internal recommendation from people who you have actually worked with. Otherwise, I think it's pretty worthless. But yeah, the written recommendations before the interview, no, I don't think it helps.
This is where LinkedIn can come into play. So if, for instance, you have done your research and you've connected with the interviewer, or you've just looked on their LinkedIn and you have a connection, like a first connection in common, if you can bring that into the interview in some way, it could be that you worked on a project together and you know the outcome of the delivery was strong, then I would mention that. It shouldn't make a difference, but it will.
So yeah, okay, that's a good one. So this isn't about, just to clarify, this isn't about external reference from people.
No, it's more a kind of connection in common. So yeah, sorry, yeah, slightly off piece.
No, it's a good point though, isn't it? Because if you're applying to a big organisation, then you've worked in the industry a while, then you may well know someone who works there, and
yeah,
particularly well, they may well be able to kind of put a good word in there. It's like that age-old saying that it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think sometimes,
especially if you can bring it into the actual interview in the answer to one of your questions. If you get asked a specific question and then you can bring it in there, drop it in.
So do you find that you hire a lot of people from that? So people who know others who already work for your companies, is that something that happens?
Yes, it definitely has. So it wouldn't affect our qualifying process in or out, but typically someone's CV will highlight that they've worked on a similar program or project, which is why they would be selected for interview. And we wouldn't make a decision based on kind of feedback internal, but a lot of the time as well, reputation in the industry and the size of the programs and projects that you may have worked on, we will be able to tell that that's suitable for us and our requirements.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. Anyone else got anything to add to that one?
I think, like Richard said as well, if it's relevant to the position. So if you're in a sales role and you've got feedback from customers that you've sold to, or a specific manager within an area that gives a bit more confidence of what you can do, then fair enough. But I think for the most part, I know personally, I don't tend to read them. A lot of people don't give that much weight to referencing. I don't think at the end of the process, to get an understanding whether someone's been true to their CV and to their application, and to make sure that they've got evidence of the points. So, for example, our referencing system we use asks the referees to give a bit of feedback on a few areas they've said that they have competency in, and it's just like a check and balance, rather than us saying we're going to take that as a major part of the process, because otherwise, I find it takes away from the process, because we're there to try and assess, this is our fresh view of this person, and it can work against someone as well. It could be that the reference is poor, and do we take it in that case as well, or do we trust what our process says?
Because ultimately references are always going to be provided from people that you probably don't know. And I suppose there's little point in having a whole interview process if you're just going to look at the reference and make a decision based on that.
You have to trust your process. That's what the interview process is there for. But going back to that credibility and making sure that you're truthful, that comes across in an interview. So especially for technical roles, if you lie on your CV or in the interview, it comes out straight away. So it's best to be honest and what you can do and can't do. Most organisations will be able to offer development and training opportunities in areas that you lack. So be honest.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've covered a lot on follow up and agree on a lot of those points around what people can be doing to maximise their chances. We haven't got any more questions on the YouTube channel. I'm going to put you on the spot slightly. So apologies. I just wondered whether if you just look back at perhaps the previous situation you had where a candidate went for a job where you expected them to perform extremely well, you thought they were potentially a dead cert to be successful, and they weren't. what the reason was for that without going into specific detail, and perhaps what they could do differently. I wonder whether anyone's got any examples that they could share.
I think there's an interesting one which kind of links into inclusion a little bit as well, but make sure that you've got the person's name right, especially in this day and age. So if you don't know how to pronounce someone's name, you can kind of fall down at the first hurdle because you've not made that effort to try and understand how to say it. Like, you need to know, is it Pam, is it Pan? You need to understand how to pronounce it, right? And if you don't, you end up looking like an idiot right from the start.
That's a great one, yeah.
I've got an example, a recent example. So first stage telephone interview was really strong. The CV couldn't be stronger on paper. But then it came to face-to-face interview, and the candidate couldn't answer any of the questions specifically. So they were just completely going off piece, but they was also really flat in the interview. It was a client-facing role, so we wouldn't have been able to have put this person in front of a client. So it just goes to show sometimes you can get overexcited by a CV, and then the way someone performs in an interview isn't always, best.
Yeah, I think we've probably all experienced a few of those situations, and it's frustrating it's frustrating first of all for the candidate, but it's frustrating for everyone in the process. And it probably goes back to some of the stuff we've already discussed around, things like the STAR technique and using specific answers to questions that you're given, rather than, going off on a tangent. I think probably sometimes when people are nervous, they can tend to do that. And it comes across, and it can end up being quite a big negative. Has anyone else got any final kind of pearls of wisdom, do you think?
Try to do something a little bit different. So again, when I first started out in agency recruitment, I was told to give yourself some extra points, do something a little bit different. So for example, going to interview for Next, you might be going into a purchase ledger role. However, it's still a retail business. So show some interest, go into the business, understand what it looks like at a point of sale, understand what kind of things they sell, show genuine interest. And I think Danielle, in fact, I think everyone picked up on it a bit earlier, to show an interest in the place where you're going to work, because you might be going to work in a specific discipline, but you're still going to work for the business as a whole. I'm not saying you have to be overly, I don't like the word passion, but I'm not saying you have to show that you're in love with the business, but at least demonstrate a willingness and an effort that you've gone to try and do a bit of research about the place. Yeah.
And to jump in, sorry. But also what you can do is, let's say the CEO's posted yesterday on LinkedIn. Look at the CEO, the LinkedIn postings of the CEO and just comment on them. So he's got an idea of who you are. And the rest of the staff see you commenting on his posts. So therefore, he's really keen. He's responding to XYZ person.
The other piece of advice, again, it seems very basic, but a lot of the time when you go into an interview, you're nervous, and you've got a persona. So my biggest piece of advice is just be yourself, ask as many questions. Don't walk out of the interview and regret not asking or not answering a question in a certain way, because you may never see them again. So just approach every interview that way. I think that's advice we should take.
Yeah, I always recommend this to people that I speak to, because as much as I'm always kind of wanting to make sure everyone knows what our role is in the process and the value of a recruiter, an agency recruiter, there's nothing more important or more valuable than a candidate asking the questions directly themselves, rather than getting the answers through someone like me, because it's never going to be as clear to that person unless they hear it from the horse's mouth. So if they can ask there and then they'll give themselves a much better or clearer picture of the role they're recruiting for, and they'll probably also seem that much more interested.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of people talking about money at interview either, particularly if you've gone through a recruiter. You should have already had that conversation, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine that you're putting an interviewer who might not even know what the package is if it's a larger organisation into a bit of an awkward situation. So I'd suggest being on the front foot and trying to get some of that detail earlier if it's important to you, and if not, just wait till afterwards, or wait till you get offered maybe. But yeah, really get ahead of the game before that if you can.
That's an important one. So 50 minutes in, and we just the final mention of money there. So Most people probably are most interested in a job because it pays. And Rash just said there that, you know, money probably shouldn't be mentioned at an interview. What does everyone else think about that?
100% agree. Definitely not first stage.
Yeah.
I also, before the pandemic, would say don't bring up remote working and working from home. Flexibility in the first stage interview goes hand in hand in money. But personally, I wouldn't go for an interview if I didn't know that the role could achieve what I wanted. So I'd know that up front before even going in front of them. But definitely don't ask it.
It's embarrassing moments.
Embarrassing moments, yeah. I guess everyone's had a situation where that has happened, and it probably doesn't always lead to the outcome that the person wants.
The problem is, whether you like it or not, when someone starts talking about money, you then think, particularly when it's at the end as well, you think, okay, they're in this for the money. When really, particularly if you're a manager who's interested in particular areas, say you're head of software engineering, you love software engineering, and the last thing you can think about the person saying is, what's the money like? You're thinking they're more interested in what you get paid. And I know it's a bit of it's like a big metaphor, isn't it? Because ultimately people do go to work to get paid. But if you're that person that has a real interest in what you're doing, you want the other person to share your interest. And like you mentioned about going on a date earlier, it is a bit like that, because you want to know you have things in common with this person, things that are important to you. And those things that are important to you in a work interview are the work that you're doing. So for someone to then bring up money, although it's important, it shouldn't be the most important thing at that time, at that interview. It's about finding out about that person and then finding out about you.
Right, great. So this is the benefit of doing a live session, because we've just spoken about money there. Someone's come back on the YouTube channel, and they're going to put you to task on this. So, and it does happen. What about if they're asked about money? What should they do in that situation?
Right.
Pay me what I'm worth.
But don't undersell yourself, because then you have the situation where initially in an interview you think, well, now let's say you actually want 55,000, but you say to them, I want 50,000. And then when it comes to negotiation, you're in the back foot. So just be careful there.
Also, the interviewer needs to know your worth, but you need to know your worth as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's you should be confident, and if you feel that the interview's gone well, you know beforehand what the role's paying. So I would be honest and say, this is what I'm currently earning. For me to leave my job, this is what I'd be looking for.
Okay, so you're saying it's not a problem to talk about it, but it probably shouldn't be something that you initiate. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. I like that, what you just said. So I was just saying, I've never thought of it the way that Danielle put it. I thought it was a really nice way to go back at it. I'll have to remember that for when I'm next interviewing.
Thanks.
Final question that I've had. So I think we've all sort of said that it's useful for candidates to ask questions at the end of the interview and sort of challenge back to the interviewer. But how many questions do you think is acceptable? You know, should people be going in with a couple of pages of A4 with 40 questions on, or do you think 1 or 10? What do you think?
I think a lot of the questions will get answered during the interview anyway. I think have a clear understanding of what you want to know from the interview. Try to avoid the kind of top 4 that are on Google. I can probably tell you what they are because I get asked them every time. So try and be a little bit creative, but also, you know, don't ask questions for the sake of asking them. I think 2 or 3 for me is the right sort of amount at the end.
It depends what kind of memory you want to leave with yourself as well, I guess. So if you're going for a role that's going to be like in e-commerce or trading, try and think of a question that's related to something you've seen from your research. So again, you're kind of drawing it back to things you've done to prepare. Don't ask questions for the sake of asking questions. And then if you literally had some questions which you thought were great and you didn't get to answer them, I found personally when I've been interviewing, it's really helped if I've said, well, actually, I was going to ask X, Y, and Z, but you managed to pick that up throughout the interview. So it shows you had prepared something, you were thinking about it, and then it's almost giving them a bit of kudos as well because they asked you a good question. And who doesn't like flattery?
Yeah, and I think if you're really struggling for questions or they've been answered, you can always ask, what would you expect me to achieve in the first 6 months or 12 months? I mean, that you will not find that information on the website clearly. So I think it's good to ask about expectations and the specific projects they'll be working on. But yeah, expectations is a good thing to ask about.
Yeah,
I think that's a great one, actually. Sorry to interrupt. The expectations, because we've probably all, again, had situations where candidates work for an organisation, and the reason why they're looking for a new job is because they felt that the role was different to the one they applied for, or was different to what was described to them in an interview. I've probably heard that a lot of times, hundreds of times. And perhaps, as Margaret says, if people are actually asking that question in the interview, then it can be far clearer by the time that the offer comes through. Go for it, Danielle.
A similar question, but the question I always like to be asked is how will I be measured? So it's a similar way of asking it, but if it's a sales role, obviously, then it's quite obvious. But a lot of tech roles, it's hard to measure.
Great point. Yeah. Okay, excellent. I think we've certainly reached the end of the questions on the YouTube channel. There's been some people watching along, and hopefully we've been able to share some insights with them. I'm also going to share or write up the notes and share these points with lots of people that we're talking to about finding work at the moment. And finally, we'll share this video with anyone who's interested in trying to watch along as well. Thanks very much for getting involved.